Here are 100 tips for game devs split up into 5 categories of programming, design, music, devlogs, and social media. Let's do this. Firstly, you might think that programming is a super technical thing. And, well, it is, but you can also do a lot with just a pen and paper. Even in your head, just create a flowchart of what actually needs to be done before putting it into your text editor. Sometimes you'll be coding up a new mechanic, but there is so much stuff to keep track of and you can easily lose focus on what you're trying to do. My biggest tip for this is to stay organised and use comments for your code. It helps to break up certain parts of the system that you're making and allows you to easily come back into your project without any confusion.
Copying other games is a great way to learn programming. Unless you release them as your own original creation, that's called plagiarism. But trying to create classics like Pong, Tetris, Pac-Man or Flappy Bird will help you understand the basics of programming, and it will make sure that you have something playable within a short time frame.
Don't be afraid to ask others for help. There are mountains of awesome websites, online forums, and social media that can connect you with other programmers and game devs just like yourself. Whether you have a simple question or are just really not sure where to start, the game dev community will be more than happy to help you out.
If you're working on a new game and you realize that a mechanic you're working on is something you've made in the past, use that old code. That is another reason why you should try and optimize your code to make sure it can easily be used in future projects. Of course, if you're joining a game jam where this isn't allowed for some reason, don't do it, but otherwise work smarter, not harder.
Don't make your code any more complicated than it has to be. If it can stay simple, keep it simple. Remember that you can always go back to parts of your code you're a bit suspicious of and not too sure if it's working correctly. It's not going to go anywhere, it's not going to run away, it'll be just as broken as when you left it.
Also, another thing I see people mentioning quite a lot is about their skills as an artist not being up to scratch. So one thing I'd recommend is programmer art. There's nothing wrong with using it. If you're not an artist or you're just playing around with an idea, a simple white square or any shape, I'm sure Icoso can definitely vouch for that. If you like a minima style anyway. But if basic shapes do bother you, use an asset pack. If you're going to release the game commercially, maybe try and think about changing it before release. There's nothing wrong, I suppose, of using an asset pack for a commercial game, but why would people pay for something they can see in another game? Like the exact same assets. It's a bit of a stigma, but I would say, yeah, use an asset pack, use simple shapes, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to be an amazing artist to make games, just make games.
Starting your first game in 2D will make it easier, and you're more likely to finish a small 2D platformer than that massively multiplaying online RPG that you dream to create. As boring as it sounds, I know, the only way to stay motivated as a game developer is to set reasonable goals, and who knows, in a few years from now you might create the new Minecraft without even realizing it.
When you first start out a project, make sure you get the most crucial elements in first. That's your player movement and controls. Try to do the fundamental programming aspects before moving on to anything else like art or music. Unless you want to, I don't control your workflow.
Keyboard shortcuts and commands can be very helpful. Take advantage of features like Visual Studio's IntelliSense to speed up your programming. Try looking up guides and documentation to the software you use and pick up a few new shortcuts at a time.
Learn how to use keywords in Google smartly. Otherwise, you won't be coming up with many helpful results when stuck. Some helpful phrases is your programming language, your game engine if you're using one, and any other terms related to the issue. If you kinda know how to code something up, but not entirely sure, just do as much as you can before looking at any tutorials or forums. Trust me, this is a great tool for learning and developing good habits. Now, this tip could really go in every section, but I think it's most applicable to programming. Sometimes you'll be spending hours upon hours trying to get something to work and you just can't. So the best thing you can do is take a small break. You've probably been inside for about 3 or 4 days, so take a walk. 5 minutes is probably enough. Come back with a fresh mind and refill your motivation for coding.
Learn source control. Source control is a fantastic way for you to have backups of your project to go back to if you need them. Just make sure you use it often because you don't want to be creating one thing, you add it in and you push it after doing a lot of other stuff, because say then if one of those little things breaks and you have to go back, you'll lose all the progress you've done. So you want to be using source control as often as possible. It can also be a good way of tracking your progress. It's just something I found I use quite a lot because you can see your first use of it and then say your last use of it or the middle use. And if you're making devlogs with it, it's really handy because you can kind of see what you've done throughout the week if you use it often enough. So use source control, learn it and use it a lot.
Learning to code by following tutorials is an amazing way to get into game dev, but you have to be careful when doing this. You might finish up with an awesome game or project, sure, but have you actually learned any of the concepts as you went along? Every game engine and scripting language is different in at least some way, but most have a pretty steep learning curve. Not to say it's impossible, but just saying you do have to put some focus towards it.
It doesn't matter which game engine you pick at the start, just pick one that you like and stick with it for a while. They all work in similar ways, and once you have learned one engine, it's rather easy to apply the concepts to another one.
There's nothing wrong with first getting something to work without the code being efficient. Once you know the solution to what you're trying to achieve, properly writing the code to get there will get much easier. Also, pseudocode can be a great help here too.
If you're doing a game jam, your code really doesn't need to be that neat. Chances are you'll only be working on the game for less than a week, but if you have a bigger passion project in mind, it might be a good idea to keep your code readable. Name your scripts or code files or whatever something relevant. If you have a set of code to control your player, don't call it pancakes.cs. I do it all the time and I get super confused, so I highly suggest you give them names that are easy to understand. My go-tos are player movement, camera controller, game manager, score manager, and things like that. With every game design choice you make, think, will this make the game better? Think about it from the perspective of the people playing your game, and once you've created the feature or implemented the level, see how it impacts the game as a whole. On that topic, the best way to know if your game is good is to play it. You'll find flaws in the game design, pick up on things that you missed before, but probably a better way to go about it is to get other people to playtest it. They don't know what's coming up and will usually have a much more open and genuine approach to the game.
In a more general sense, playtesting is a very important tool to learn what players think about your game. Design, create, test, and iterate is a common workflow in the games industry, so you'll see yourself going through this cycle a lot.
One tip I really think is worth all the time and energy is to learn color theory. Making a color palette is crucial for making your game look nice. Although, if you're not that experienced when choosing your colors, you can use palettes from online. Websites like LostSpec are really helpful when doing this. Hue shifting is also another technique that many pixel artists use to make their colors look nicer. To sum it up quickly, when making your color darker, shift the hue towards blue or purple, and when making your color lighter, shift the hue towards yellow or orange.
Mood and inspiration boards can be a great way to guide your game's art style. Images from your favorite games, movies, or just pieces of art can be great reference.
More detail does not equal better. Sometimes all your game needs are some simple shapes or nice colors to make it appealing. Really think of what your game project needs in terms of visuals and go from that initial spark. Practice. Seriously, art is one of the only things that you can really improve just by practicing. This is what my art looked like 2 years ago, and here is what my most recent game project looks like. It's not good, but it's an improvement, and that's why you should do your best to practice your art whenever you get the opportunity.
Your game's quality doesn't depend on the graphics. Sure, a nice looking game comes a long way, but if simple cubes with simple textures or simple shapes is what fits your game idea, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Good and innovative gameplay always comes before graphics. But don't use it as an excuse to not learn art either, just do what fits your game best.
Not sure if this is exactly a design tip, but the controls of your game should be really intuitive. Don't make W your shoot button in a twin stick shooter or the left mouse click the pause button. Stick to the formulas that other games have given for the most part, but hey, it's always good to experiment.
If you decide to make a puzzle game, understand that playtesting is now one of your top priorities. You want to test puzzle ideas as soon as possible with other players so that you can get feedback and improve the levels. Get your first puzzles out quickly. They likely won't make it into the game, but they will teach you important lessons about your game's mechanics. This will allow you to create better puzzles faster.
You might have heard that it is best to implement the mechanics of your game first before moving on to the art. This is normally done to make sure that your idea can be fun and worth spending time on. However, doing the art first might motivate you more, unlike looking at a bunch of random shapes. Well, this is of course excluding the games that are intentionally using shapes as their form of art. Having done the art first gives you a clear view of what your game might end up looking like, and could be an outstanding source of motivation.
Menu screens help you get around your game, but you can easily make them look a lot better with simple shapes and buttons. Also, having a good amount of space between UI elements can go a long way. You don't need to cram everything in one small corner of the screen. And make sure your user interface is simple to understand. This is a pause button, this is a restart button, and stuff like that. You don't want people halfway through your game not knowing where the score is, or how to exit the game, or how to pause, or how to transition into the next hit. Twitter and Instagram are great places to share small gifs and new artwork for your game to hype up the audience, but also to get a bit of feedback. You can post them and see what people like best. Take advice with a grain of salt. Things that work for some people don't work for others, and things that work for some yield great results for others. If advice you've gotten isn't working for you, then try something else. Everyone is different. This doesn't mean you don't listen to advice and make an open world MMORPG for your first game, just do what works for you. If you're using text at all in your thumbnails, story, cover pages, don't make it bad. Never use Calibri, it is not a display font, and you will create a much better first impression on anything you make with a nice readable font.
Before jumping into your game engine of choice, it can be useful to plan your ideas out on paper. This is a fast and cheap way to test your ideas and find problems early. You could even build a paper prototype of your game and test it with friends.
And remember that bigger and complex levels don't always mean better. If they're too big, in fact, they can seem really daunting to the player, especially if they're new. There are some obvious exceptions to this, like Minecraft. The map is considerably large, but if you're making a bunch of levels for a puzzle or a platformer, or a puzzle platformer, try to keep them relatively small in scope. With Metroidvanias, you can branch out a little more for the feeling of exploration. Finally, if all else fails, just use squares. Squares are good, squares are friend. Melodies are the really catchy bits of songs, and if you don't have a good melody, your music will begin to sound weak. A really easy way around this is to use the pentatonic scale. This is simply the first, second, third, fifth and sixth notes in a scale, and placing these notes in any arrangement can produce a really cool melody. A good base of a song also relies on the chords used in the piece. They can be triads, or they can not be triads. Anyway, coming up with a bunch of chords by yourself can be a bit challenging and daunting, especially if you've never been too involved with music production before. A website that I really love, Chord, you basically put in a few settings, press the generate button, and you have yourself a chord progression. Pretty cool stuff, and you can easily incorporate it into your song at the beginning of the production process. Bass is funky, but they're not always easy to come up with. Bass lines, I mean. Usually I just follow the notes of my chord, but this can be a bit boring. If you want to spice it up a bit, play around with the rhythm and the pitch of the bass, and sticking to the same notes as the chord is usually a good idea. But remember that every game doesn't need to sound exactly like Geometry Dash. Sure, a lot of this game's appeal comes from its music, but that's only because it fits in well with the gameplay and graphics. It wouldn't fit in the calming world of Minecraft or the ambient environment of Hollow Knight, so just think about what music suits your game the best before jumping into a massive electronic piece. You don't need to create an absolute banger in 5 minutes. Good music often takes time to create, and sometimes the best thing you can do is step away from your computer and instruments and come back with a clear mind. You'll get new ideas for melodies and drum beats and everything else. Are you stuck with still making a catchy chord progression? People who are into music production will absolutely bash me for saying this, but a really easy way to make something sound good is using the 1-4-6-5 rhythm, and it sounds like this. So many pop songs use it, but in the right way you can try to hide that you're just recycling the same old progression. Still very cool though, and for a game jam where you don't have much time, it can definitely help you in a pinch. Drum beats is something that I've always struggled with, and if you suck at percussion like me, you might also have some trouble with creating a good drum beat. If you have this problem, you can always rely on the simple kick-snare rhythm. It's really easy, just play a kick, and then a snare, and that's it. You can always throw a couple of hi-hats in there as well, and overall it'll give your music a lot more weight and structure. Be careful of running into some common traps though, like sometimes when you have a lot of instruments playing at the same time, it just doesn't sound too good. If this happens, you can turn down the volume of some instruments or tracks, and some music software even have built-in features to prevent this happening. Making music can be a really fun process, and I think it's important not to get bogged down in the nitty-gritty of it all. Especially if you're putting together a cool track for a game jam or something like that, just experiment with a few instruments and basic melodies and see what you can come up with. This pretty much contradicts everything I've just talked about, but hey, what can you do? Sound effects are awesome. They go beep beep boop boop, and try to add sound effects to every action in the game. Hitting a button, beep. Selecting an item, boop. Killing an enemy, explosion sound, I don't know. Obviously, don't add too many sounds that it takes over the gameplay, but sound effects are just a great way to add a bit of emphasis and weight to the things you're doing in the game already.
You don't have to worry about making your own sound effects necessarily. There are plenty of websites that allow you to download free sound effects without any copyright issues. Making good sound effects is hard. Don't be afraid to experiment. You can always change it later.
Making your death sounds really impactful is a great idea. When something explodes or gets stabbed or whatever, you want to have that effect driven into the player's mind. Otherwise you can just, download the Roblox oof sound effects and use that. To get in the right headspace for the type of music you want to create, just listen to that type of music. If you want to create something retro and chiptune, go listen to the Mario soundtrack. If you want something a bit more upbeat and vibey, listen to the newer Mario soundtrack. I find it so much easier to make lo-fi music myself once I've listened to a lo-fi mix for 5-10 minutes beforehand. You might be making some background ambient stuff with piano, and that's great, but if you want to add a bit more of an atmospheric, cloudy, misty sort of feel to it, try adding some pads or even light sounding synths. Chromatic scales. Very cool for making your song sound jazzy. Between notes, just add these small dips or rises in the melody, and when done right has a super awesome effect. Even just one note stepping to another, that semitone can add a lot of emphasis and variety to your song that might be missing.
It's very intriguing to make a bunch of mechanics for your game and have the sounds and music come last. However, I can recommend not waiting that long, especially with sound effects. Adding some sounds relatively early will make your game feel much more alive, and maybe even more fun.
Never underestimate the power of repetition. I was really scared of making my song sound too repetitive and that it would get boring to listen to. But I've come to realise that pretty much every song out there has at least some sort of repetition in it, and that's definitely not a bad thing. Heck, if your song is changing up all over the place, it would become really hard to follow and probably wouldn't get the audience vibing the way that you want them to. Finally, I think the most important thing that I can say about all of this is that you don't need some fancy schmancy music software like FL Studio or Ableton. There are a bunch of free programs that you can download or simply use directly from your browser. If you're looking to make some chiptune and MIDI music especially, I highly recommend Boscasio and Beatbox, links in the description. Never post a devlog video without watching it all through first. Trust me, you will find heaps of little editing mistakes that you can super easily fix up, and they may not be very noticeable, but your video should be a whole lot better once you've gone through it and just polished up all the small things. At the same time, take a bit of a chill break and just enjoy the awesome content you have made. Record lots and lots of gameplay and video clips for your devlog. You don't want to have to repeat the same footage over and over, that'll get boring pretty quickly, and so make sure you have lots of different videos showcasing different parts of your game.
But something I think really helped me is you find a style of devlog that works for you. If you look up to someone in the devlog community and you really like their style, maybe go from there. Try not to be a carbon copy, as you can really tell when someone is just a copy of another devlogger. But make that style your own, experiment. You should write down notes. Like what I used to do was write down notes of devlogs I liked and see how I could amalgamate them and combine the different ideas together. And then see how different things work for you, because you can't, some people do B-roll where they just record the footage that's going on around them in the day. But that's not always possible. Some people throw in like, today is Wednesday. And again, that's not always possible because maybe you don't get to work on your game every day of the week. So just do what works for you and play around. There's no right or wrong answer, just create and share.
Have a catchy title, make it bold and to the point so it easily grabs people's attention, and make it something that you would click on. Alongside that, make sure to make a thumbnail that stands out. Have vibrant and saturated colours, maybe a popular game figure, and if you have text, make it really, really big. Also, have a look at thumbnails that other game devs use and take inspiration from them.
Be confident when you speak. I know I might not sound that confident right now, but I'm still practicing. The viewer can really tell when the video is going to be worthwhile their time by the enthusiasm in your voice. If you're speaking like this, then they might just click off immediately. But if you're speaking like this, then they're gonna want to stay because no one wants to listen to a half-asleep person.
Keep it consistent, not necessarily throughout separate videos, but at least for one video that you're making, try and keep the energy and quality at about the same level the entire time. This will boost your attention and boom, you're famous. If you're making a devlog video for a game jam or something like that, make sure to add that devlog to your game page. That means everyone who's checking out your game jam entry will probably click on the video, and that is a great source of views, especially if your project does well in the jam.
If you're planning to create a series of devlogs, just know that the first devlog most of the time will do better on YouTube, as people tend to be interested in discovering new things, mechanics, and people. So if the video you upload after does not receive as much attention as the first, please do not feel bad. It is just how it works, and people that want to stay will and the others won't. I have experienced this myself and seen many new YouTubers give up because of this. Just keep in mind that it will always get better as you keep going.
It can be a really fun idea to show what your game was looking like in the previous devlog video, obviously if you're making a series, but don't spend too long on this. Chances are your audience watched your last video and know what it was about, and if they didn't, they probably don't want to feel like catching up on that progress. They clicked on your video for a reason, so quickly get to your main topics of the devlog.
Facecam or no facecam, doesn't really matter. Show or don't show whatever you are comfortable with in your devlogs. Each has its pros and cons, so don't feel forced to do either one if you don't want to.
Humour, memes, self-deprecative jokes, all of these questionable things will get people to stay on your video longer and might even get some funny comments out of it. You don't need to have all of these in a devlog video either, because my corn memes have absolutely been the centre of attention on my Discord server. Well, I mean, not anymore. Like, Cornso's kind of a dead meme because this video took way too long to make.
Planning the structure of your video comes a long way, either by scripting the video or just making a list of things you want to talk about. This can help you not going on a bunch of tangents, but also keeps people interested when done correctly.
If you do write a script for your devlog, which I think is a great idea, see if you can come back to it in 24 hours and read it over again. You'll probably think of some new jokes you can add in, remove any unnecessary statements or rants, and you'll feel a lot more confident in creating your next devlog video.
People have a very short attention span, so keep the devlog engaging. This doesn't mean you have to get rid of all the silence, definitely keep it in if it makes sense or if it fits your style, but always try to remind yourself that you're at risk of losing viewers by having completely silent moments. Sound effects and music come a long way to help with this.
If you have some text or graphics popping up on screen, add a cute little sound effect. It gives it a little bit more oomph and keeps your audience entertained.
If editing is not your thing, or you're still learning how to do it, be sure to get the hang of the basics first, and once you feel comfortable, try out a bunch of new things to spice up your devlogs. But don't be discouraged to at least attempt to make a cool effect appear, or whatever it is that you want to achieve. Trying is the first step to learning a skill.
You don't necessarily have to over-explain the code, but commenting on how each part of the code impacts your game can be a pretty cool idea for the more focused audience. If you want to have people watching from outside the game dev community, I'd suggest only briefly mentioning the code you spent 6 hours on. Sad times, I know. You can never go wrong with adding some simple background music in your devlog videos, except if the background music is blasting off your ears because it's too loud. Whatever editing program you use, you should be able to easily tone down the volume of an audio track, so just be careful that your music doesn't overpower everything else in the video. Having other game devs and YouTubers in your videos can be really fun. I would know, because I asked a lot of people to write out their own tips for me, but there are so many of us here on YouTube that are willing to even just record a few lines for your video. Don't be scared of us, we don't bite too much. When you make a post on something new, be sure to share it around. On Twitter, you can use hashtag ScreenshotSaturday to share clips and photos of your game, and also hashtag WishlistWednesday if you want to get a few more wishlists on your project. As an avid Twitter user, the most helpful tip I can give you for tweets is hashtag FollowFriday. Every Friday, a bunch of developers will tag one another promoting their work and hopefully allowing their followers to check out their profile. I got involved with this right when I was starting out, and I don't really do it much now, but I still think it's a great and very wholesome way to interact with more people, especially when just creating your account.
Use it. Social media, despite all the negativity with it, is the best thing for you and your creations. One good tweet or a post on Reddit can make your game or project seen by thousands of people. Also remember to have fun with it and use catchy visuals. People love to see a GIF and something that looks good rather than just a block of code. Some people do enjoy the block of code, do not get me wrong, but visuals and GIFs are the way to get people's attention and get them to be looking at your stuff. So yeah, use it.
Especially on Twitter and Instagram, actually follow other game developers. Don't be a stupid idiot and say, haha, follow for follow, love me please, but do it just naturally. Also be sure to constantly check out their projects and posts and leave comments on their work. If you're scrolling through Twitter super quickly, chances are that most of the plain text won't be catching your eye. This is why I always like to add a simple photo or GIF to most of my tweets. They gain a bit more attention, and yeah, it's just a nice addition to whatever you're tweeting about. As best as you can, try to keep your name consistent across different platforms. If Icoso is taken on something, which it usually is, I stand by Icoso Games or something similar, just to keep it the same across Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, stuff like that. It's also a good idea to keep up on your social media as much as you can. I often feel burnt out after a while and stop using it for a couple days, but every other day I try to tweet something or make a post on the community tab or check in to see how the Discord is going. It just helps you momentum as a game dev and keeps you connected with your audience, which as an indie creator especially is very important.
A platform that is very overlooked for game dev is TikTok, despite the cringy content you may find on it. TikTok is a great platform for building an audience for your game as it allows for fast-paced growth. Some advice on making them is having them around 15 to 30 seconds long. 1080 by 1920 with engaging text pop-ups. Use trending hashtags and trending songs where you can actually put the song volume to 0 if it doesn't fit the content.
Occasionally, try to throw in some fun posts to your Twitter or TikTok. People might not be expecting it, you'll reach out to some new people, and it helps break up your usual content. If possible, try to build up a good following on a lot of different platforms. Myself, I stick to YouTube, Discord and Twitter as my main 3, but I know that Instagram and Reddit are also great places to share your work. I've tried managing my own profiles there, but I think 3 is a good spot to be in, but hey, that's entirely up to you. People don't really want to be reading essays, so keep your post to the point and only include what you really need to. Obviously, if it's a bit of a deeper subject, feel free to dive right into it, but if you're simply promoting a small game or video, keep it short and spicy.
Becoming an overnight success takes, on average, 2 to 5 years. Don't be discouraged by small numbers. I've seen a lot of game devs break down over this despite them having way more raw talent than me. Provide value to people, do it consistently, and over a long enough period of time, your effort will even out. I promise you that.
If you have a big passion project, try to incorporate it into a lot of your social media profiles. Make your Twitter header something related to your game, maybe even change your Twitter profile picture to the player character. This is something I want to start doing for my game meeee, but only once I get the Steam page up and running and people actually have a place to go and wishlist it. Try not to comment on too many controversial topics. It's just, yeah, it can get a bit iffy. If you feel really passionate about something, I'm not going to stop you and no one else can either. But just be aware that there may be backlash from certain groups of people. The internet can be a pretty cruel place at times, so yeah, be careful, but of course, if you're passionate about a cause, speak up about it. Respond to comments. People take the time to leave comments and feedback on your work, whatever it may be, so it's a good practice to respond and welcome them into your community. However, this does become more difficult when you're as famous as me. Link your YouTube and Twitter and whatever in your Discord bio thing. Every click counts and there's not really much point for you not to have it there. Patreon equals money. Money equals good because you can buy cats and also more cats. There's no problem at all with setting up a Patreon page, and if you're planning to make one, why not do it right now? I started my Patreon page way back in my earlier days. I was basically a fetus. But trust me, getting that little bit of traction at the beginning goes a long way, so start it up as soon as possible. Ko-fi is another great option for this sort of stuff. If you find that your patrons are leaving and not giving money anymore, there's actually this tab in Patreon itself that lets you see the reasons for people leaving. Some say that their financial situation's changed, others say that I didn't post enough content, but this is pretty helpful for me to understand why pledges might fluctuate across the year. Try putting out some teasers for what your next video or game project could be about, get your audience excited for it and build up that height. I said height, I meant hype. And finally, tip number 100, just go make your game. Thank you all so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any other tips, feel free to leave them in the comments below. A massive thanks to the awesome people that helped me write and record their own tips for this big chonkers of a project. That's CG Sky, Dakota Van, Daniel Dionysus, Dev Nugget, Games by Saul, Jetpack, The Shelfman, Tons of Fun Studio, and Usman Dev. All of these channels will be linked in the description. Finally, thank you to my incredible supporters over on Patreon, especially Chance E, Derpydino35, Devin Rosenthal, Lucky Light, and Trash Taku. And I will see you all in the next video.